Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for a detailed cover-to-cover book review of the Horus Heresy Book 5, Tempest by Forge World. So here we have it, the fifth book in the epic series of the telling of the tales of the galactic civil war between the War Master Horus and the Emperor of Mankind. And this fifth book immediately catches the eye for the depiction of the enormous Warlord Battle Titan on the front of the book, and of course this book was released in 2015 to coincide with Forge World's release of the heroic scale miniature, the largest model that Forge World has ever released, so certainly an eye-catching book. Once again we've got a high quality leather book in the style of the previous four books, with these metal corners and a ribbon to mark your position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this book cover to cover. I'm going to show you a selection of the artwork, and I'm going to take you through the key themes in terms of the history, the units that are described, the rules as well, and then I'll also give you my opinion at the end as to whether I think this book is worth buying or not. Okay. So let's begin, and immediately in the front cover we've got one of the impressive Forge World sort of models mixed with computer generated graphics depictions, and we have a word bearer, Cerberus Super Heavy Tank Destroyer, followed by a Rhino. But immediately we see something disturbing here, and this is a form of one of the Galvorback Astarte's demon fusion creatures. And here we have the opening observation. It says, "The hand of the traitor struck, and hell followed with it." That is indeed very much what happened, and what this book very much chronicles. And of course, Tempest is chronicling the Battle of Calth and the beginning of a Shadow Crusade in the Ultramarines sector. Right, so we've got the contents page. As in book 4, this book isn't attributed to Alan Bligh as being the primary author. We also don't have a list of which members of the Forge World team contributed, which is a shame, so we have had that previously, but anyway, it is what it is. Right, so what contents do we have in book 5 Tempest? So the first section is War at Calth, and that's a large and very well developed description of the events leading up to the battle itself and the aftermath of this devastating conflict that was to wreak terrible damage to the Ultramarines. We then have a section on units, the Ultramarines, the word bearers, 2 Titan legions, the loyal Legio Prosigius and the traitorous Legio Certivora. We have the Nighthouse House Vaughan here, the Mechanicum Tagmata of the Calth Muster, and the Warp Cults of the Age of Darkness. We then have the Betrayal at Calth campaign. This is a series of missions in a structured campaign to allow you to recreate the battles of Calth. Then we have the introduction of a new army list here, which is the Imperial Militia and Cults army list. So this is a new army, very interesting and creative army. We have some additions to the Space Marine Legion lists, the Mechanicum getting some new units, and then we have the Legion specific rules for the Ultramarines for the first time, and also we have an update on the Legion specific rules for the word bearers, who originally appeared in book 2. And then finally we have a revised set of Titan rules and background, and finishing finally of course with the rules for the mighty Warlord Battle Titan. So this book very much goes back to the style of the first 2 books, and it focuses on one key event, which is the Battle of Calth, and it focuses on that in great detail, unlike the particular book 4, which was quite disparate in terms of what it examined in the heresy. So we move forward, and straight away we have this fantastic miniature and art picture of a group of Legio Presidius Titans advancing forward, supported by Ultramarines, and we have a pair of Warlords, a Reaver and a Warhound. Interestingly, this Warlord Titan was actually a pre-production model of the final Warlord, and you can tell this because it has a different chest armour design here. If you're ever able to go to the Warhammer World in Nottingham, Games Workshop's sort of central exhibition hall, and go into the miniature exhibition, this model is actually on display as part of the enormous Ultramarines and Chaos diorama, which has got, I think, around 5,000 miniatures depicted in it. So yeah, it is that's a place where you can see this unique model. And again, this is a sort of art that you get throughout these books, and they're printed on very high quality paper. You've got this gold edging as well, which gives them a nice feel. So we start with a preface, and once again this is by our semi-anonymous Imperial historian, AK, and AK is recounting the events of a Horus Heresy, which he lived through the Great Crusade, the Heresy, and then the aftermath, and you get the impression that at the end of his life he's writing these histories as a rare person who saw the whole thing. Okay, so let's start looking at the section of history. So the first part here, we have the war at Calth, and it's split into several sections. The first part is called the Shadow of War, and what this talks about is the aftermath of the battles of Isfahan III and Isfahan V, and how Horus Lupercal realised that following the setbacks of those initial conflicts, it was not going to be possible for him to strike a single driving clinical blow against terror to overthrow the Emperor. Through his own losses, mobilisation of other forces, and escape of some loyalists from his traitor legions, he was no longer in a position of surprise and sufficient strength to do that. So this talks about how Horus started to plan for a longer war, and how he also started to invoke the treachery and certain cults and saboteurs that he'd infiltrated throughout the Imperial dominion. It also talks about the prelude to the Battle of Calth. And this section here, which is called The Price of the Imperial Truth, discusses the mindset of the word bearers and their humiliation at Monarchia, when of course their city, made it as a monument of worship to the Emperor, was raised by the Ultramarines as Imperial censure against Lorgar for trying to worship a deity. And this enormous snub and humiliation very much leads to Lorgar's desire for revenge, which is borne out in a terrible way in the Battle of Calth. This section here talks about the campaigns of the Word Bearers and the World Eaters, so the beginning of a Shadow Crusade, and how they initially were two legions at odds with each other, and particularly Lorgar and Angron nearly came to blows. However, ultimately they do make their peace of sorts and become an effective fighting unit. And it touches briefly here on some of the events that are precursors to what eventually happens when Angron returns to New Syria, his original homeworld, and the portentous events that occur there later in the story. Here we have Corpheron. Corpheron has a significant role to play in this battle, as does Erebus and Lorgar, and all three of them plot a insidious and deep fate for Calth. This description here is of part of the campaigns to expand the Ultramar section in a particularly dangerous zone that was encountered, which had to be quarantined. And it talks about, as well as the Ultramarines, it talks about the Titan Legion, Legio Tempestus, which is involved in the Martian Civil War, and it actually mentions the Titans, the Master of Allegio, Indius Carvalho, who, if you read the story Mechanicum, he's a character who features in that story at a later stage of a timeline of the Horus Heresy. And here we have a depiction of a Solar Auxilia trooper of the Ultramar section. And this is symbolic because, of course, the Ultramarines are well known for their honourable treatment and close cooperation with their auxiliary troops. So we now move into the beginning of the naval battle around Calth, and the battle initiates with the word bearers arrive in the Calth system in great force, but they do so under the flag of the Emperor, and the reason for this is Horus has deceived the Ultramarines into believing that there is a major orc warlord that has to be defeated, and he has orchestrated a situation where the word bearers and the Ultramarines were to muster at Calth before launching their assault. What this means is the word bearers are billeted on Calth, and their fleet is in system in force, but under the flag of the Emperor. The battle begins when a word bearer vessel, the Campanile, is accelerated to maximum sublight speed, and it flies into the orbital dock, the main orbital dock of the Ultramarines fleet, causing great devastation and instantly destroying several of their capital ships. And here we have a depiction of the Viridia system, which Calth is a world. Here we have the world of Calth. It talks about here the planetary defence grid. The Ultramarines don't have as strong a void fleet as certain legions did. However, Calth was supported by around 1,000 enormous orbital defence platforms, which gave the world immense naval protection. However, this was not to be effective, tragically, for the Ultramarines. Once the Campanile's assault had happened, the next act was for the word bearer ships to open fire upon the Ultramarine fleet, and they did so with great damage and devastation. And the parley that had been going on between Lorgar and Gulliman, or Guilliman of the Ultramarines, Rabute Guilliman, broke down, and apparently it was one of the only occasion that people know that Rabute Guilliman completely lost his temper when he realised the treachery that had befallen his legion. The other opening act of the word bearers was to seize control and immobilise and render inoperable the orbital defence network. They didn't control it, but they did render it inoperable, and that gave them the edge in the naval conflict to begin with. And then this talks about the battles of the orbital defence and the desperate attempts by the Auxilia to defend the platforms, most of which were futile. The flagship of the Ultramarine fleet, the Honour of Macragge, suffered a terrible blow at the start of the battle when a horrific warp entity emerged on the bridge of a ship and then exploded, completely blowing out all the vision ports, killing various key crew, including the shipmaster, and hurling Rabute Guilliman into the void. And not only was the Honour of Macragge taken out of the fight, the word bearers brought in a huge number of monitor naval vessels, which opened fire on the planet's surface with deadly weaponry, including atomics, which wreaked. Millions of civilians were killed and huge amounts of damage were done to the defences. So yes, it was a truly diabolical betrayal. And none more so on the actual surface of Calth, where the billeted word bearers and their cults turned on the Ultramarines and their auxilia savagely. We get some quite precise casualty figures here and dispositions of the fleet. So at the start of the battle there are 185,000 Ultramarines on Calth and 50,000 word bearers. In the first 12 hours of the battle, 100,000 Ultramarines are killed. That's killed, not casualties, actually killed. So this puts the Battle of Calth in the same league in terms of casualties as the Battle of Istvan V, which gives an idea as just how devastating this would be. And as well as the actual just devastating battle, the word bearers were behaving in an un-Astartes and illogical tactical way, so they were less concerned with the usual tactical finesse and strategic manoeuvring that one would expect of Space Marines, but instead seemed obsessed with killing and causing as many casualties as possible, the reason for which was going to become all too apparent very shortly. And yes, in terms of talking about the dispositions, this is actually set out in great detail here in this section called the Calth Muster, and it details the troops that were billeted on the planet, ready for the false campaign against the Orcs. They were the Ultramarines, the 2 Titan legions, which is Legio Praesagius, the True Messengers, Legio Certivora, Infernus, or the Fire Masters, the Knights of House of Vornir, and then the Mechanicum Tagmata of Calth, including Tagmata Xerxes, which was to become significant later. And the word bearers were fanatical, but also callously sacrificed on Calth. They were actually specifically chosen to die by Lorgar, and he sent those who he saw as being lacking devotion to his cause, or perhaps loyalty, and also those he saw as being too fanatical and ambitious. So yes, he committed his force with no expectation of their survival. Things went from bad to worse for the Imperial defenders. Not only were they ambushed at short range, but they soon were subjected to the predations of the Gal Vorbak demonkin, which caused terror amongst the defending troops. And confusion. Mechanicum Automata struggled to target them due to their demonic presences, and of course human troops were terrified of them. Ironically, it was an equally unsavoury group of troops from the 22nd chapter of the Ultramarines, the Destroyers, who actually were accustomed to fighting horrors and gave a good account of themselves against the Gal Vorbak. So at this point, the defenders had been devastated by the attacks of the word bearers, and the situation was certainly looking dire and desperate, both in terms of the losses in space but also on the ground. The Titans had been ambushed. There were a handful of the surviving senior officer of the Legio Praesagius ordered her reavers and warhounds to scatter into the city, and she led her 9 warlords on a suicide charge against Legio Certivora to buy them time to escape into the city, where they would have a better fighting chance. And those 9 warlords became known as the Paragons of Ithrica. This section talks about the battle from the Crag's Honour, so the desperate battles aboard the ship, and not only was the command deck blown out, but also it was boarded en masse by the word bearers and some denizens of the warp. And here we can see a group of Ultramarine Terminators and a Venerable Dreadnought facing off against warp entities, and of course we would recognise those as being bloodletters of the Chaos God Khorne. However, the Ultramarines do begin to gain the upper hand. They gradually manage to reorganise, and eventually fight their way forward and start to take control. One of the chapter masters manages to save the Archmagos of the Mechanicum, who had been surrounded by a group of warp entities. And although they're not named from the description given, I recognise those particular warp entities as being demonettes of Slaanesh. And then the miracle of miracles occurs, where Rebute Gulliman, despite being ejected into the vacuum of space without his helmet, manages to return aboard the ship. So some truly superhuman Primarch physiology saving him there. And he then obviously reorganises and leads his troops to reassert control aboard the Honour of Macragge. Then the next section talks about the Ashes of Calth, and this talks about the devastating aftermath of the attack of the Word Bearers and their demons and titans. As the battle progressed, in the early stages of the attack on the main orbital port, Ithaca, an enormous Mechanicum Titan lifter was beginning its ascent into the atmosphere, and one of its 4 main engines was destroyed by lance fire from orbit. The Mechanicum managed to crash land it reasonably intact, and the surviving loyalists start to converge on the crash site in the hope that some of the Titans aboard it will survive and will, if they can get the doors open, will then serve as reinforcements. Some fantastic pictures. This is taken from a large diorama that Games Workshop made a number of years back, which is pitting a battle between the Word Bearers and the Ultramarines. And then the 5th part of this story is the Battle of Ithaca, and this is a detailed description of the battle for the main port. And this here talks about the Titan muster and the deadly ambush that occurred, and the loss and the downing of the Mechanicum Titan lifter as well. Of course, all the while that this is happening, not only is immense military destruction occurring, but a huge number of millions of the civilian inhabitants of Calth are perishing as well. And all of this is part of Lorgar's grand plan. Yes, and the Mechanicum lifter is called the Arutan. And as the story progresses, it describes how many soldiers and civilians were taken prisoner by the Word Bearers for dark and disturbing purposes. And indeed, the Word Bearers even sacrificed tactical advantage just to be able to kill more souls. And here we have a list of the 9 paragons of Ithaca, the valiant Warlord Titans who led a suicide charge against the Fire Masters. And the situation becomes increasingly desperate on the ground, and even the Ultramarines, the surviving Titans of Legio Presigius, are all hemmed in, and also the main Mechanicum Archmagos of Tagmata Xerxes also is desperately hemmed in, and ultimately the Archmagos, who's a member of the Ordo Reductor, sees that he cannot win, so he dismantles a plasma reactor from its housing and turns it into a improvised bomb, which is detonated, wiping out the pitiful remains of his own force, but also a huge number of word bearers and their militia who were attacking them. However, there is then redemption as the survivors cluster around the Aratan. The main door is finally managed to be opened, and an Imperator Titan strides forth supported by 24 further warlords, and the battle is turned by this enormous addition of firepower to the defenders. However, no sooner does that happen than the zenith of the word bearers' killing occurs, at which point the ruin storm is manifested on Calth, and in dozens of places denizens of the warp are able to enter the materium, and they run amok, killing friend and foe alike, with the exception of the word bearers who they do not attack. However, the Imperial forces do eventually manage to gain the upper hand and eventually are victorious. And but it is at a great cost, as well as the enormous number of Marines that are lost. Pretty much all of the Titans of Legio Presidius are destroyed. And then the final section of the history of the Calth battle is this epilogue, and this deals with the turning of the battle, and how the Ultramarines firstly re-exert control in the orbital area, and this is talked about here, the retaking of the Zetsun Buried Yard, which was held by Corferon. Rabute Guilliman leads the attack on it, and despite Corferon bringing him low with the powers of the warp, he musters the strength to grievously wound Corferon, who had the temerity to try tempt him to join the War Master's cause. And Corferon only survives because he's teleported out of the chamber. Once the Ultramarines, though, have exerted control of the orbital satellites, then the battle does swing, and they then visit a terrible firestorm from orbit onto the traitors. Here, I like this picture here. There's a felled head of a Warlord Titan being passed by members of the Gal Vorbak. And that brings us to the end of the section, the story of the Battle of Calth, and it is a truly gargantuan and terrible battle. For in total, nearly 148,000 Ultramarines are either killed or maimed to the point of being unable to fight again. And that was out of an initial force of 185,000, so only 40,000 Ultramarines escape the Battle of Calth. So given the chapter's initial strength was 250,000 Marines, they're reduced to around 80,000 of their original number. And all of this is achieved for a loss of 50,000 word bearers. So, from a point of view of a strategic situation, it is a decisive victory for the traitors, because it hobbles the Ultramarines for the rest of the heresy and they're no longer the strongest legion, and all their effort is taken up until the very end, dealing with the situation in Ultramar. And then we come on to the section about the Ultramarines. So what we have here is a discussion of the chapter's origins, its homeworld, its fighting style, and its the influence of being reunited with their Primarch. And I was interested to read this section, although I'm not an Ultramarines player. I was very interested to read how this has been written, because some Ultramarines story has been written in a slightly Mary Sue style fashion, shall we say, in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And particularly those people familiar with the the codex written by Matt Ward, that did not make a good impression with a lot of the fan base. However, I was very pleased that this had been written in a very authentic and faithful style to the other 4 books and the Legion descriptions, and the Ultramarines are portrayed in a balanced light, shall we say. Yeah, I mean, and it talks about how Guilliman became the leader of his world, Macragge, which was a sort of Macragge had a governmental style which was something like the Roman Republic. He reached its head and then swept away all the noble houses and instituted a meritocratic system in its place. And then it talks about the structure of the Ultramarines as well. And the forces and their tactical styles. And they've got a nice picture of a radio dreadnought of the chapter, or Legion, should I say. Then we get a section on Ultramarine heraldry. I mean, the Ultramarines are very fond of their heraldry, very Romanesque. And then a depiction of a number of legionnaires as well. And each legionary is accompanied by a story pertaining to them. And here we have the Invictaris Ultramarines. They're elite veteran swordsmen. I always think these guys look a bit funny because they have this. I always think they look like they've got a facehugger attached to their helmet from the film Alien. And some Terminators. And here's a Destroyer Legionary of the 22nd chapter. And this guy is the closest that you get in this section to a Terran paint scheme of the Ultramarines. Quite often in these books we get an early depiction of what the chapter looked like, but not so much in the Ultramarines. And then finally we get an exemplar battle, which goes through a famous battle that they fought, and this is called the Debt of Vengeance, and this was a battle against an alien species called the Cybrids, which was a costly and difficult war for the Ultramarines, but they were ultimately victorious. Then we have some images and discussions around armoured forces, including the advanced Sikaran tank and the Spartan assault vehicle. And then we move on to the word bearers, the infamous Legion of Infamy. This is revisiting this because the word bearers were originally dealt with in Book II Massacre. But in this book they get revisited and their story is updated with the events of Calth. And again we get heraldry and icons, and we get these chapter banners, or these standards that are with piles of skull. They're beginning to appear somewhat damned at this point. And then here we have a terrible depiction of one of the Gal Vorbak as captured in a picked image in the battle for Ithaca City. And part of what made the ambush so terrible at the start of the Battle of Calth was the fact that, along with the rest of the word bearers force, the Gal Vorbak were hidden from view, and it was only when the battle began that they assumed their true form as demonic warp entities. And then we have some other word bearer legionaries depicted, including a member of the Ashen Circle. Here we have a Diabolist, a variant chaplain, and he's wearing what was to become the iconic Chaos Space Marine backpack design. This particular design is actually supposed to be an orbital manoeuvring device, or a modified backpack with an orbital manoeuvring device. That already at this point it's starting to take on an iconic look. And then we have 2 word bearers armoured vehicles, including a Falchion super heavy tank destroyer. Then we move into a section dealing with the 2 Titan legions. So the first is Legio Praesagius, Here we have a great picture of one of their warlords unleashing the fury of its bellicosa volcano cannon, and their paint schemes and heraldry. Then we have the loyal House Vaughan here, which fought closely with Tagmata Xerxes in the battle for Ithaca. They were wiped out completely, and not one of their knights survived. And then a detailed description of the varied and eclectic mix of Tagmata forces that made up part of the Calth muster, and some depictions of some Castellax, including this one, which I like. This is a member of Tagmata Xerxes. It's actually in something approaching what could be a camouflage paint scheme, which is a rare sight in the 30k universe. Now this next section talks about the warp cults in the Age of Darkness, and with the propagation of Horus's betrayal and rebellion, warp cults began to be an integral part of his war effort. These cults represented the rejection of the imperial truth and the secular rationalism of the emperor's way, and these guys actually began to replace the imperial militias and auxiliary forces to a degree. And the degree varied upon legion by legion. I mean, the Sons of Horus embraced them with great enthusiasm, as did the word bearers, although in a crueler, perhaps, and more disposable way. However, certain traitor legions were unhappy with allegiances to warp cults. For example, the Iron Warriors used them as expendable troops and didn't really want much to do with them. The Night Lords just outright didn't trust them, which I think is quite interesting. They preferred their own people. It doesn't mention the World Eaters in here. I wonder if that's because they just kept them away from the World Eaters in case they killed them all. This talks about the Primordial Annihilator, which is an early term used for the creatures and entities of the warp. And of course, this is in a time when a lot of humans were ignorant of the warp, and it's interesting to have this early name for it. And it also was called the Eightfold Path. And then this section gives us an overview of several warp cults that were involved in the Battle of Calth, and there's a wide variety of the weird, wonderful and downright disturbing in there. And the Davenite Lodge priests of the Sons of Horus get a mention as well. Then we move to Legio Suturova, the traitor Titan Legion. These guys have got a slightly cliched, chaotic looking paint scheme. And that completes the unit histories, and then we move to the Betrayal at Calth campaign. So this is a phased campaign which has got the full Age of Darkness rules within it, and it's designed to allow you to recreate the Battle of Calth between a variety of forces. So so a good, well-developed campaign. It's very much in the style of the campaigns of the first two books, the Istvan battles, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Then we move to a brand new army list, which is Imperial Militia and Cults Army List. So to reflect the supporting troops that we'd seen elsewhere in the story for Calth, both on the Imperial and Chaotic side, we get the army list to play them. And this is a really good army list and very imaginative for the player. And what it does is it really gives you a set of rules that allow you to use any model that you have, any sort of like human infantry and some inhuman ones perhaps, to make up a force. And it's very inventive. And what really gives it its flavour is this set of rules here, or for me it does. And this is called the Muster of Worlds, Provenances of War. And what the Provenances of War are is they are army characteristics, and you pay a certain number of points for them, and then you bestow various benefits and penalties on your troops To give you an example, we have gene-crafted soldiers, alchem jackers, who you can equip with friends on dispensers. My personal favourite, the survivors of the Dark Age, the survivors of the Dark Age of technology, so high-tech militias. Feral warriors, abhuman zealots, and the traitors have access to the cult horde and the tainted flesh. So be it whether you want to play zombies, fanatic cults, beastmen, proto-powered armour, elite humans, even equipped with rhinos and land raiders, or weird and wonderful gene-crafted troops. This gives you the options to do that. So I think it's a great addition to the army lists of the Horus Heresy, and I think it's a really good army. You can have a lot of fun with it. As well as the flavours of troops, you get all the usual vehicle options that you would associate with Guard, and you even get some of the weird and wonderful for the traitors, such as mutant spawn. And you can even take a Solar Auxilia, a Stormhammer super heavy assault tank if you wish. We then have some additions to the Space Marine Legion list. The Duradio Dreadnought, the Xiphon Interceptor, and the first of the two great super heavies to appear in this book, the Sokar Pattern Stormbird, so Nathaniel Garrow's transport of choice in his service as a knight errant. And yes, this is also available as a model now, a very impressive, large, expensive model, unsurprisingly. Now for these rules, the militia list is still pretty in date, and would be a reason to buy the book for. However, if you want the Marine editions, you're better going for the actual Crusade Army List book, which has actually got up-to-date versions of this. The Mechanicum gets some additional units, and they also get some additional fluff, and this is really good. This talks about the Ordo Reductor. This goes into some detail about the Ordo Reductor, and it's very interesting. And it does make the observation that of the three main groups of the Mechanicum, so the Tagmatters of the Forge Worlds, the Legio Cybernetica, which tended to some of them went independent in the Heresy, but there was a slight preference or bias towards declaring for Horus. However, the Ordo Reductor generally stayed loyal to the Empire, which was interesting. But yes, so the Mechanicum get the Skill Axe, Thanatar Calyx. That's not a Thanatar Calyx because the model wasn't out when they print setted this. And the Thanatar Cenis as well. The Domitar Battle Automata. Then we move into the Ultramarines Legion specific rules. And you get a variety of Ultramarine heroes as part of this, and unique squads, including the awesome Fulmentaris Terminator Strike Squad. So if you want a squad of heavy weapon Terminators to rival the Tyrant Siege Squad of the Iron Warriors, these are the guys. Captain Remus Venatus, who a recent store-only model was based upon. And then Rabute Guilliman as well himself, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. We then have an update on the Wordbearer Legion specific rules, including their unique consul, the Diabolist, and the effects of the dark channeling. So you can create all sorts of weird and wonderful effects on that, including turning squads into demons. The Maragal Tainted Dreadnought, so the horrible effects of the union of a Gal Vorbak and a Contemptor Dreadnought. The Gal Vorbak themselves, the Ashen Circle, High Chaplain Erebus and Corferon, two very pivotal characters in this. The Possessed Zardu Layak, the Crimson Apostle. He is a chapter master of the Ochre Gate chapter, and he was basically viewed as being too ambitious by Lorgar, so was sent to die on Calth. and he's accompanied by the Anakatis Cull Blade Slaves, and there's some excellent forgeable miniatures of those. And then Lorgar himself. And then you get the rule here for Lorgar Transfigured, so you can turn him from being a weaker Primarch into one of the more deadly Primarchs by fully manifesting his latent psychic powers. And then finally we move to the Titan Legions. So this section includes some background and story to the Titans, but also a rewriting of the rules for the 3 Battle Titans, so the Warhound, the Reaver and the Warlord. And this normalises rules from the various other Horus Heresy books and Imperial Armour books into a consistent set, and introduces various rules such as the God Engine rule and the Towering Monstrosity rule, which is important for these guys. And it rebalances some of the hull point scores as well. And then last but not least, we have the rules for the epic Mars Warlord Battle Titan, which is as impressive in the rules sense as it is as a resin model. Very novel thing to play a game with. And a little bit of interesting description around how Titans might work as well. Then we have weapons descriptions as well. These Titan rules are pretty up to date. I think the only addition is around the Ariok Titan Power Claw for the Warlord. There's an option for 75 points to add a Vulcan Mega Bolter, but they're still pretty up to date. So yeah, and then we have the usual afterword from the Forge World team thanking you for buying the book. And there you have it. Little bonus thing. We're just going to go back to the front cover. In this picture, there's a canonical error, and I'll be interested to hear from anyone who can spot it. So I've looked at this, and I've spoken with an experienced GW vet of mine who's also spotted it. Yeah. Can you spot the canonical error in this picture? Anyway, so there you have it, Book 5, Tempest. An epic tale of the terrifying Battle of Calth. So yeah, what do I think of this book? Well, I really enjoyed Book 5. I think it was after the slight wobble, shall we say, on Book 4, where the history did come a bit unstuck. I thought this was a real return to form, and it was a very enjoyable read in terms of the story of Calth and then also the background to the units. Rules-wise, obviously you've got the campaign, it's got the militia list, which is still pretty up to date as I can tell. Obviously you wouldn't buy this for the Marine lists, the Marine edition, armor list editions, or the Mechanicum ones. You're better off getting the red books to get the complete set of up-to-date rules. But yeah, but obviously word bearers and particularly Ultramarines players in the Heresy, there's a lot of appeal in this, and if you want some stories about Titans blowing stuff up as well, yeah, there's a bit to be had there. So yes, I would recommend this book. It's the shortest of the Horus Heresy books so far. It's about 265 pages long. The Conquest that came before it was 305, and the preceding 2 books are about 285. However, this is a case of less can be more, and I wouldn't let it slightly shorter length. I wouldn't mark it down for that at all. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to that detailed review. If you've got any comments or observations, please let me know in the comment section. I do appreciate you watching, so thank you very much. I'm going to finish this review with a brief tribute to Sir John Hurt, who has sadly passed away today at the age of 77. It is not possible in just a few words to do justice to his incredible career as an actor and the many memorable performances he gave. Whether he be a man for all seasons, an owl eyeing up the delicious mouse in the Gruffalo, or in his Oscar-nominated portrayal of John Merrick, he was a true great of theatre and film. I will, however, briefly mention 2 performances that I believe contributed something to the hobby this channel is about. Firstly was in Alien as the unfortunate Kane, a film that helped shape the visual tropes of hostile, otherworldly life in the Warhammer 40,000 universe and the grimdark horror we also appreciate. The second, more direct contribution was as a shrewd Chaplain Karnak in the Ultramarines movie, a role he took knowing something of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, having taken his young son to Games Workshop years before. Never have heretics been burned with such conviction. May you rest in peace, John Hurt.